I call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 46 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments firearms. We have two panels of witnesses today. We'll start the first hour. We will have with us by video conference, we will have from the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, we have Dr. Atul Kapoor, Emergency Physicians and co-chair of the Public Affairs Committee. And in person here with us in the room, we have for the Canadian Coalition of Firearm Rights, we have Rod Giltaca, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director. So welcome to you all. So we will start by giving each group a opportunity to make a 5-minute opening statement. I will invite Dr. Kapoor to make an opening statement. Please go ahead, 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. And thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee. The Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, of which I'm proud to be a member, is at the forefront of treating patients and families with from traumatic injuries, including firearm injuries and death. As such, we have a unique perspective on how we can work to de trauma of such injuries and deaths. As well, we are particularly aware that despite a lot of publicity regarding homicides, 3 out of every 4 firearm deaths in Canada are suicides. And we think that that important element is often missing from the discussion and dialogue around firearm safety. And that is one of the areas that we would wish to focus on. Where there are more firearms accessible, there is increased trauma, there are increased injuries.
Pardon me, sir. Just pause.
Oui.
The interpreter is telling me that there are connectivity problems.
Yeah, sorry, we're going to suspend for a couple minutes or a minute. We have some translation issues, so. meeting, and I'll ask Doctor to carry on, Dr. Cooper.
Thank
Make the
you.
best of it.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to a little slower and more clearly. As I said, we want to highlight that 3 out of every 4 firearm deaths in Canada are from suicide rather than intentional or homicide or accidents. In fact, Canada has one of the highest rates of suicide by firearms in the developed world. And there's strong and robust scientific evidence that having a gun in the home is associated with a higher risk of suicide. For every 10% decline in gun ownership, firearm suicide deaths drop by 4.2%, and overall suicide rates drop by 2.5%. As well, availability of guns is associated with homicide, and particularly with domestic violence homicides. And we also note that of suicide deaths, the vast majority of them are impulsive, so that if you can reduce access to means with high lethality, that people will not usually switch to other means, the so-called substitution effect, and that with a means of lower lethality, that there are more chances to intervene and prevent the suicide altogether. With that, excuse me, we wish to focus in on the red flag law provisions of the bill in front of you. CAPE has called for many years for a mandatory reporting system and a red flag law in Canada. By that, we mean a medical reporting system of individuals at risk. However, we have concerns that in its present form, the language in the bill will have very limited effectiveness, principally because the law will require an application to a court to have firearms removed from a home or an individual's possession. We continue to maintain that this is far from the timely responsiveness that is required in our view, where we as emergency physicians must be able to report the incident or a person at higher risk to the police directly in order to protect the individual and their friends and families. When minutes and hours count, days or weeks to act is indefensible. This applies to patients who are at high risk of suicidality, but do not reach the level where they would need to be admitted to hospital. Also applies to patients with a history of dementia and impulsive behavior, or in particularly to patients we identify at risk of domestic violence or interpersonal violence, placing the onus on them or on victims of interpersonal violence, on a family member of a depressed person or a demented parent, is largely unworkable and an unwelcome hindrance to getting the guns temporarily out of the home of those in crisis.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
On point of order, I'm sorry, who was that?
It's Mr. Schiefke, Peter Schiefke here.
Mr. Schiefke, yes.
I believe that there is a quorum call in the House of Commons. Is that possible?
That is possible.
Can we verify that, and if so, ensure that?
If that is the case, we will have to have unanimous consent to carry on. So I'll ask the clerk to check into that. Meanwhile, we'll let Dr. Kapoor carry on with his statement. And sorry for the interruption once again. I'm sorry? Move to suspend? Okay, we'll suspend for a few minutes. Okay, thank you all for bearing with us. When the lights start going off in the room here, it either means a vote or the House is adjourning or starting, or in this case, it was a quorum call. And generally speaking, if there's a vote or something, we require unanimous consent to continue. However, it seems like the quorum call has been resolved, and we can continue with, once again, with apologies, Dr. Kapoor, if you could carry on with your statement.
Fortunately or unfortunately, as an emergency physician, I am familiar with being interrupted. If I to come back to the point regarding our concerns regarding the red flag law provisions that are there currently in this bill, the requirement to go to court provides is a significant roadblock to the effectiveness of this part of the legislation. And it would need to be combined, we feel, with the allowance for physicians, particularly emergency physicians, to report issues of concern of higher risk to police so that intervention can occur in a timely manner. There is one example of a red flag law in Canada already. That's Anastasia's law in Quebec. It has also been rendered less effective because of the lack of resources that have been provided in order to support its use and to educate the public and physicians on how to use it appropriately. So we would also call for adequate resources in terms of knowledge dissemination, education, and the ability for proper response to occur once a situation has been reported. And finally, as emergency physicians, we continue our call that we've been making for many years for appropriate research and resources for research and database and gathering so that we can have more accurate information and scientific evidence on which to make further policy decisions. So I believe that was my 5 minutes, Chair. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Doctor. We will carry on now with Mr. Giltaca. Welcome, and please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thanks. Members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to chat with you. I really appreciate it, and Mr. Chairman. So concerning Bill C-21, I guess we can just jump right into it. There are some provisions in this bill, or at least maybe the motivation behind them, that our group can support. And the reason I say that is because we want a safer Canada too. In fact, I might add that we share a lot of the same safety concerns as a lot of the individuals and groups that you've heard in this committee so far as well. So, for example, we support revoking the license of those who are guilty of domestic violence or those who are subject to a protection order. Granted that the order was proven and justified. That's really important. Obviously, we don't want innocent people being caught up in a new system like that. And we support those kinds of things because they just make sense. We obviously don't want the wrong people being able to legally buy guns. Although, in my experience, that and a lot more already happens. Currently, anyone can contact the police at any time if they have a safety concern involving firearms. It's taken very seriously, and the police have the legal ability to search and seize almost anything, depending on the level of concern they have for public safety. So that, you've heard that before, so you're not hearing it from me for the first time. There are other provisions in the bill that, of course, are absurd. I think most people realize that already. There's a new charge for modifying a cartridge magazine. It's already a very serious criminal offense to be in possession of a cartridge magazine that can contain more than the prescribed number of rounds. And the possession offense is the only one you could ever really prove anyway, unless you caught someone with a prohibited cartridge magazine in one hand and a file or a drill bit in the other. So it's plus you can 3D print magazines. So it really doesn't serve any practical public safety purpose, that provision. Another example, unfortunately, is raising the maximum penalty for firearm trafficking from 10 to 14 years. I'm not aware of anyone ever that got 10 years for firearms trafficking. I'm not, and I don't know that because I haven't sat on can leave for days on end, but I have never heard of that. But I've heard a lot of the contrary, and you guys have heard that as well, I think, from law enforcement professionals. So, yeah, so that measure ends up being a little bit meaningless too. So when I look at those two measures, it just says to me that these are opportunities for tough on crime talking points, and I just don't think there's a place in legislation for that kind of stuff, right? So it's a bit of a concern. Now, of course, we're most concerned about the handgun ban. And I understand the limitations of this committee process, why we're here, but I will just offer a little bit of perspective, and we can talk about the provision after that. I guess saying it simply, the handgun ban is unjustified. The committee heard some great information in this process and obviously some blatant misinformation. You've heard from numerous active duty law enforcement personnel that the ban on handguns from licensed individuals will have no meaningful benefit to public safety. Here's a quote from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and I quote, "We believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these types of firearms while allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport." Fair enough. However, we continue to maintain that restricting lawful handgun ownership will not meaningfully address the real issue. And they go on to say, talk about gangs and other criminal activity, right from the Association of Chiefs of Police. You've heard numerous retired members of law enforcement say essentially the same thing. You've heard from an exceptional criminal defense lawyer that the handgun ban won't change the behavior of criminals or their level of access they have to illegal firearms. You've heard from sports shooting organizations that the ban will hurt them in the short term and extinct them in the medium term. You've heard from gun owners that their property will be taken from them by no fault of their own whatsoever, and that their identity and their culture is repugnant and there's no place in Canada for them. Now, I'd suggest that law-abiding licensed firearm owners are deserving of respect and they're just as entitled to their place in Canada as anyone else, as outrageous as that might sound. For non-gun owners, the nuclear option of gun bans sounds reasonable only because it's predicated on the idea that handgun ownership is some frivolous, self-centered, unnecessary hobby. And it ought to just be swept away along with these 650,000 people that are licensed to own handguns in Canada. So I'll tell you that that does not align with reality at all. So I don't envy you for having to deal with a bill like this, but I would ask that you explore other options to mitigate the illegal handgun problem, which we all can see very plainly, and before supporting a ban that affects only those who comply with the law. So I appreciate your time and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. We will start our questions at this time. We will start with Mr. Lloyd, please. Go ahead, 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Kapoor. The studies that you just cited on suicide and homicide, can you tell us if those studies were done in the American or the Canadian context?
Most of those studies, I believe, were done in the American context. Some were, I believe there are some Canadian studies, but as I'd said in my opening comment, one of the things that we have repeatedly called for is the resources for
I
research.
Agree with you.
And
we definitely do need
research.
better data and information on this.
Regarding,
I would just hope that you could table those studies that you cited to this committee, because I'd asked for them from other witnesses previously and they didn't hand them in. So I hope that I can get a commitment. If you have those studies available, could you table them to the committee so that we can review them at a later date? Something I was a bit concerned about, maybe this is an education opportunity, but is there anything, I mean, there's nothing stopping you as a doctor, as an emergency room doctor, any doctor, from calling police if you have a concern, a safety concern about somebody who owns firearms. Are you aware of that?
well, there is actually a restraint on me from reporting things that are held confidential due to the medical relationship, the doctor-patient relationship. There are specific areas where I am relieved of my duty of confidentiality. For example, mandatory reporting of drivers, for where I have reason to believe someone has a condition that would make it dangerous for them to drive. There's specific legislation that relieves me of my confidentiality restriction. That doesn't necessarily apply in the situations that I'm describing here, where patients may have increased risk of suicidality or dementia and impulsive behavior. So that is a restriction.
That's interesting because, I've seen cases here in the Ottawa area where somebody had a mental breakdown and the doctors did call police and they seized his firearms, and he actually had to go to court to prove that he did not have a mental condition in order to get his, or that he had passed the mental condition, that it wasn't an issue in order to get his firearms back. But that's very interesting. That's something we'll explore further. Thank you. Mr. Giltaca, would it be fair to say that your coalition represents the views of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of law-abiding firearm owners in this country?
Well, I don't think I could claim to represent that number of people, but that's pretty much the consensus, I think, of certainly most people that would have a restricted PAL, meaning they're licensed to own handguns, and certainly a great number of the 2.3 million other licensed Canadians that own a variety of different firearms.
Of course. We can't obviously speak for every single person, but a large constituency. Now, given how large of a constituency of people whose views you represent or align closely with, and the importance of firearms legislation to your community, it would seem prudent that any government consult with you guys about their proposals. Did the government consult with your organization, or as far as you know, any like-minded organizations when drafting Bill C-21?
They haven't. We've been asking for a meeting with both ministers of public safety back in the Bill Blair days, and also the Prime Minister and anyone else we can think of, and we've never got a reply. So no.
So you're being ignored by this government. This Democratic government is ignoring the perspective of hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have concerns about legislation that disproportionately affects them, and you guys can't even get a meeting. That's very disturbing to me. The Liberal government has repeatedly said that their legislation doesn't target law-abiding firearms owners, but I think we've seen with C-71, the handgun freeze, and now C-21, that the primary impact of this legislation is solely on law-abiding handgun owners or law-abiding firearms owners. Why do you think that is?
Well, my personal opinion, it's ideological and it's political. I mean, that's why you would have provisions in the bill that have no meaningful play no meaningful role in public safety. I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but yeah, that's my opinion.
It seems to me what's at stake here with this legislation is that there's an entire culture of people in this country who've been in this country for as long as even before we became a country, that are now going to be slowly phased out of existence by this government through this kind of legislation. It seems like they're phasing out law-abiding firearms owners, particularly handgun owners, but there's no evidence. Is there any evidence that this legislation will do anything to phase out the real problem, which is violent criminals?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that the government has had an opportunity in these hearings to provide evidence, and I haven't seen anything at all compelling so far, but that's not for me to judge.
Do you think it's kind of disturbing that it appears like, an entire group of law-abiding people, a culture, we've seen the mounted sport shooters, we've seen IPSC, we've seen Olympic sport shooters who've come to this committee. We've seen Indigenous people who earlier today said they weren't consulted, and said that this could potentially threaten their way of life and their treaty rights. Do you think it's kind of, concerning that this government hasn't really consulted with any of these groups, and that this legislation seems to disproportionately impact them and have an impact only on them and not on violent criminals?
Well, we're used to it. This has been going on for 7 years, and it is very disappointing, and it's very divisive to have firearm-related violence laid at your feet, and have your life and your choices be viewed as repugnant, as I mentioned in my opening statement. It's very difficult, and it's difficult for literally hundreds of thousands of Canadians to feel like they're a part of anything now, because they're being blamed for something they have no part to play in. Yeah, it's difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you very much to the witnesses. And I'd like to start, Mr. Giltaca. You began by saying that you don't feel as though the government has paid much attention to you and to your views. So I'd like to change that now and pay some attention to you. You said that you speak for the vast majority of gun owners in this country. Is that true? Is that correct?
No, that's not
You
what I
don't
said.
speak for the vast majority of gun owners. So who do you speak for? I understand you just told Mr. Lloyd that you do. So do you speak for
That's-
hundreds of thousands?
That's not what I said. We could play it back.
So who do you speak for?
I speak for, I'd say, I mean, if I were to guess, I would speak directly for maybe 100 or 200,000 people.
Do you speak for? That's a goodly sum of people. Do you do you believe that they all share your organization's views?
I don't think in our community people are very independently minded, and I don't think anyone shares all of each other's
I
views.
see.
no.
Okay. Your Vice President of Public Relations, Tracy Wilson, said on September 21st that she is the gun lobby. Does she speak for your organization?
I would say so, yeah.
I see.
And I would say that's a correct statement. We
That's
are
a
the gun
correct
lobby,
statement?
yeah.
Okay. So would you agree with her statement, and by extension, do you believe that it is the view of all of your members that, ha, 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 we've survived 7 years of the most corrupt, divisive, hate-inciting failed government in the history of our country? Do you feel
I
that?
think that's a pretty accurate statement, I'd
So,
say.
so
yeah.
you, sir, then have come here with a political agenda of your own. Is that correct?
I'm coming here to defend the property and my dignity as a Canadian citizen, actually.
I see. And does defending the property and dignity of yourself involve the harassment of other individuals, like my colleague Ms. Demoff?
Well, I would hope that your defense of this bill, it consists of more than mean tweets.
It's well, with respect to your organization and your vice president have appeared to have a very, very good grip on delivering mean tweets, but that's not why we're here. So let's.
To the abuse that we've taken for 7 years.
I see. I'm sorry
Yeah.
that you see the defense of saving lives as somehow abusive, but here we are. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you have said. You have said that mass shootings in Canada, which include Polytechnique, Concordia, Dawson, Moncton, Fredericton, Edmonton, Vernon, Quebec, Mosque, Penticton, Bucks Falls, and Nova Scotia, are just a small number of anomalies and outliers, and that you don't legislate to prevent such tragedies unless you're an irrational zealot. Is it your position that it's not worth trying to limit access to weapons that are commonly used in mass shootings because there are fewer such victims compared to other such gun crimes?
Well, it's my position that those are outlier events, considering, depending on how you define mass shooting, there's anywhere from 7 to 15 of those in the last 60 years in Canada. So they happen very infrequently, and they're terrible. No one's ever said that they weren't awful. Absolutely. But you don't legislate based on outliers any more than you legislate against white rental vans because we had a van attack. Those victims deserve just as much respect as any other victim. So that's just not how guns are the only topic where we act like this.
But with the greatest of respect, when you talk about defending life, you talk about outliers. You don't talk about suicide in homes where guns do end up killing people. Do you think that it is reasonable when you look at the outlier incidences of whether it's suicide, whether it is criminal acts, that we should be doing everything we can to take away the tools that are causing those injuries or those deaths?
Our firearm suicides account for 14 to 16% of overall suicides in Canada. There's 4,000
and you don't think
suicides a
that's
year
too many?
around.
You don't think that's too many?
Yeah, one suicide's too many. But
So
there
shouldn't
are
we
already
be doing everything we can to prevent those suicides?
we are doing an incredible. We have some of the toughest gun control laws on planet Earth.
On planet Earth. And do you support those tough gun control laws?
I support any law that has a demonstrable positive effect on public safety.
And so if the police were to come before this committee, as they have, including the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, who came before this committee, as well as other law enforcement, and said that they believe that limiting firearms in homes would prevent suicides, would you agree with them?
We do limit firearms in homes.
They said that further limiting through this bill firearms in homes would further prevent suicides. Are you saying they're wrong?
Well, I can't speak for the Association of Chiefs of Police. They've given you their opinion, and I've given you mine.
But do you disagree with their opinion?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
So, but either you do. I'm sorry, I'm confused. Earlier you said that it wouldn't help prevent.
I think that the laws that we have right now are adequate. Firearms can be removed from anyone's home on a moment's notice if there's a safety concern.
But
I'm not sure how we can get.
How quickly?
I'm
if
not sure
somebody
how
is
we
going,
can get any
if
better than
somebody
that
is
without
going
banning
to,
guns.
Well, listen. I mean, that's an interesting.
You're
suggestion,
advocating
sir.
for the nuclear option right out of the gate. You won't even try anything else.
I don't think it's the nuclear option, sir, when the law enforcement are coming before this committee and saying that fewer guns in homes will mean fewer people die.
So what else did they say?
Well, you're welcome to go back and listen to their testimony, where they also said, sir, that the number of firearms that are available to people the fewer firearms there are, the fewer likely instances of crime they're going to see. So, I mean, unless we all want to disagree with law enforcement, unless we want to say that the cops who are trying to keep our streets safe are wrong, sir, I think you and your organization may wish to reconsider your position on whether or not having fewer firearms is actually a good thing for this purported goal that you have of keeping Canada safer. And with the greatest of respect, sir, I think that in order to build legitimacy for one's cause, it would be helpful, as others have done before this committee, who have come to this committee with differing views than us, who have had the ability to do so and to engage in ways that did not actually involve harassing members of this committee, sir, I think we would be much more interested in hearing your views. But I have to tell you, the fact that you have chosen to come here and have done it on the pretext of the types of text message, the types of tweets, the types of videos that have been put out seeking to harm people who are trying to keep this country safe is really disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. I'll give the witness a chance to respond if you wish.
Well, I'm glad you got that off your chest. So when we entered the arena, I reached out to the Doctors for Protection from Guns, to Police Se Souvient, to all these groups and said, hey, our interests actually align. Why don't we work together? And you know what I got? I'm pro-murder. I'm a misogynist. I'm a racist. So much so that those words don't mean what they're supposed to mean anymore. That's how the other side engages. And when we send mean tweets, apparently, it's the end of the world, mean tweets, they're in response to the abuse that we've taken for 7 years. So I don't know. You can put it all on my shoulders. I can take it.
Thanks, sir. C'est Madame Michaud maintenant.
Ms. Michaud, now you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to see the tension reduced a little bit here. I'd like to speak to Dr. Kapoor. Thank you for being here tonight and giving us some of your precious time to testimony. I'm sorry for the interruptions that you had earlier. You're used to it as an ER doctor, you said. But you talked about the suicide rate that is quite high compared to in other countries. And you talked about the reporting system for people who are at risk and that the bill could have a very limited effect. Rather than asking the court to withdraw licenses, doctors should be able to report this to the police themselves. So I'm asking you a question. I'm not aware of the answer. I know that in Quebec there's the Anesthesia Act that was adopted in 2008, and that allows any person who's working in a hospital center who has reasonable grounds to believe that a person is likely to compromise their security or safety or others for themselves or someone else can contact police authorities. So is that the case in other provinces to your knowledge, or is it only the case in Quebec? And do you think indeed that it would be a good thing to conclude this in a federal framework, not necessarily because this is a provincial area of jurisdiction, but still, to your knowledge, does this exist in the other Canadian provinces?
Thank you. I will need to respond in English. The anesthesias law is groundbreaking in Canada, and Quebec should be congratulated for bringing it forward. As I had said in my response to a previous question, there are requirements for confidentiality of what we learn in a doctor-patient relationship, and there are limited specific exclusions to where we can breach that confidentiality. Anastasia's law provides that. In many of the situations where we think that would be appropriate, that is not available in other jurisdictions. We think that this is an important aspect of it, is this federal legislation with the improvements that we suggest, but it will need to be followed up with provincial changes to allow for that specific release of confidentiality requirement. The other aspect of Anastasia's law that has been unfortunate and disappointing is its limited effectiveness because of, we feel, two aspects. One is that not enough education has been done to the public and to medical practitioners about Anastasia's law existing, as well as under-resourcing of the police so that they are not always able to adequately respond when such notice is given to them. So I think those are some areas of a potential improvement. and synchronization between federal law and the provincial jurisdictions.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I always like to ask healthcare professionals, and I want to ask the question. I know that the government sees the proliferation of firearms as a public safety issue, quite rightly, but could you explain to us why they should see this proliferation as a public health issue as well? What is your opinion on that?
As I said at the beginning, we find that a lot of the debate is focused on intentional violence, homicide, and other areas of interpersonal violence. But the true fact is that 3 out of 4 firearm deaths in Canada are suicides. And therefore, that there's a great way for us to intervene and prevent access to such a lethal means of completing suicides. So we think that there is still progress to be had. There have been studies that shown that previous legislation has had beneficial effects on reducing the firearm suicide rates. We believe there's more progress that we can have and further improve those statistics. We still have some of the highest firearm suicide rates in the developed world, so there is further room for us to improve.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back quickly to what Mr. Giltaca said. I find it curious that you said that you contacted organizations like Police se souvient because you'd have interests in common, but I also saw tweets in which you were quite aggressive towards them. You said,
Irrational, hyperbolic, dishonest, low ability, slanderous, hateful fearmongers, whatever that means.
And so I'm having difficulty wondering how you might have collaborated or cooperated with that organization. You mentioned all of the groups that testified before the committee to say that this wasn't the best solution to firearms, and perhaps you forgot to mention the groups that all the groups that came to say C21 was very good. So I think you have to take that into consideration as well, and the fact that surveys show that most firearms or gun owners really support this, 67% according to one survey I saw, and another one according to Léger Marketing. Thank you.
Take a chance to respond if you wish.
There's nothing to respond to there, I don't think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll go now to Ms. McGregor. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Dr. Kapoor, I'd like to start with you. Honestly, the red flag law section of this bill has been the one that I think all committee members have been agonizing over because the testimony regarding it has really been all over the place. And I've read your organization's brief on this, and I think if we can find a way to give physicians that ability to freely talk with law enforcement, I think there's a willingness there to do that. But and I think we take into account, you have raised similar concerns as other witnesses, namely placing the onus on someone to go through an already overburdened court system is problematic. I guess, how should I phrase this question? In your mind, the police have repeated this. They feel that if there's an emergency situation, you should always, always, always go to the police. But we've heard from other witnesses, and I've certainly heard from people who have talked to me outside of committee hearings, that some groups may have a distrustful relationship with the police. And so in your mind, would having this alternative route through the courts still serve a purpose in some situations, as long as it's clearly understood that it's not to be a first resort, but like you should always go to the police first? I just want to hear some of your thoughts on that.
It's taking me a bit outside of my area of expertise. I'm looking at this as an emergency physician and contemplating a situation where I see a patient in front of me who is having suicidal ideation, who has dementia and impulsiveness, or who may be a victim of interpersonal violence. And in those situations, we are saying that we as the physicians can be the reporting person. So that takes away some of those roadblocks for family members or victims to make those reports. And that it's similar to what we are called upon to do with people who are at risk of having a license to drive. And so in those situations, it's not the individual, but the emergency physician or perhaps family doctor who would be making that report. So that would hopefully take away some of those barriers. Whether the court is there as a court of last resort it doesn't really affect that kind of situation. I'm not sure I have a specific answer for you on whether keeping the court there as a possibility is helpful or a hindrance. We are saying that we need to have a more timely mechanism to help make this provision of the Act actually fulfill its goal.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was a helpful answer. Mr. Giltack, I'd like to turn to you. It's nice to meet the head of the organization who is tagging me on a lot of Instagram posts, so welcome to the committee. I know, I understand. So you, in your opening statement, you did reference the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and I found their time at this committee very valuable, as I have in all of their appearances. I think Chief Evan Bray does a credit to the service. But when you took the time to quote their stance, they did say, we believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access. So you have to acknowledge that they, in a way, are supporting a handgun freeze. And I know they put it into perspective by also saying allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport. So, sir, my question to you is, most of the people in my riding of Couch and Malahat Langford are long gun owners, and they use those long guns for a demonstrated purpose, either around the farm to go hunting. There's a demonstrated need for a long gun. With a handgun, it's kind of harder to make the argument. They are, by their very nature, more dangerous. They're easily concealable. Some of them can discharge a high number of bullets in a very short period of time. So I think I'm asking you, sir, if we're to try and find some way to honor what the CACP is trying to do, what restrictions are you prepared to accept as an organization to both respect a handgun freeze, but to also allow sport shooters to continue the sport? You have to meet the CACP halfway in this.
Well, I think that gun owners have lived under progressively more and more gun control over the last 30 years. And handguns in particular, while any restricted firearm is some of the most highly regulated, strictly regulated property that a civilian can have. There are a myriad of regulations, storage regulations, transport regulations, handling. You can only shoot them at an approved shooting range. When you transport them there, they have to be unloaded, secure locking device on the firearm in a locked case, and you have to go straight there. If you deviate from that route, it's a criminal offense, punishable by criminal sanctions, not a fine. It's not a regulatory offense. And they're very, very
we're all
strictly
very familiar with those rules.
But
I'm asking you, what are you prepared to accept as further restrictions? Because the CACP did say that a national handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these.
Well, I think that police in general want anything dangerous out of the hands of anyone. They're supportive of banning airsoft. They're supportive of banning toys, okay, because they look like real guns. And I get that. They're always going to err on the side of officer safety and public safety under any circumstances. But I think in our society, we need to be able to have property. We need to be able to have things. right? Motor vehicles are incredibly dangerous, far more dangerous than firearms are. And they can be misused just like firearms. But we accept in our society that people should have an ability to have motor vehicles, even some that can go 200 miles an hour, unregulated. So it's really a matter, in my opinion, of it's like we are not anti-regulation. So we need to have effective regulations that keep keep firearms out of the hands of people who would misuse them, for sure. There's no argument there. And find a way for us to continue to own our property as long as we do it responsibly. And when someone colors outside the lines, yeah, come down on them, take their things, no problem. But we have to be able to live, and people have had handguns for over 100 years in this country. They've been registered since 1934.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it off here. Thank you, Mr.
So thank you
McGregor. So that brings our first round to a close. We start our second round. We'll have to do an abbreviated second round, one slot per party. And we'll start with Mr. Van Popta for 5 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here with us today. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Giltaca. Thank you for being here and for your testimony. You were asked earlier whether you agreed with the proposition that every gun added into our community brings our community closer to danger. But I would challenge that, the premise of that question, that all gun owners are the same. When I came onto this committee, I decided to take the PAL course just to see what it was like. And I was successful. I do now have my PAL license. But I was very impressed with how safety conscious people in this community are. Maybe you could just elaborate on that.
Well, I teach the PAL course, and I've run 3,500 people through that course. And I did it a long time. And I will say there was probably, to be honest, 10 or 20 people that didn't make it twice through the course, and I did advise them not to buy any firearms because it just wasn't something that was for them. But I think most people have the same reaction that you did, that the amount of regulation is more than sufficient, the safety is sufficient. Now, there are things that could be improved, and I'm more than happy to submit some ideas in a brief before the deadline. But yeah, I think most people would agree that have gone through it, got their license, saw what this is all about, understood why people own firearms in the first place and how important it is to them, and I'm glad you had that experience.
Thank you. In an earlier study that this committee conducted about guns and gangs, we learned that the vast majority of firearms used in crime were smuggled in from the United States. And one of our witnesses said, we live beside the largest gun manufacturing culture in the world, and we share the longest undefended border with them. So admittedly, this creates a big, big problem for us. But perhaps you could just comment on that, the difference between guns owned by lawful gun owners and guns smuggled into the United States by criminal gangs.
Yeah, the overwhelming firearms used in criminal behavior come from the United States. And that's anywhere from 80 to 90%, I think, and it varies by jurisdiction. So, for instance, there are some smaller cities in Canada where they would have more domestically sourced guns, but they're seizing less guns overall. So even just a little bump in domestically sourced guns reflect as a higher percentage. But typically 80 to 90% come from the United States. The remainder of those, virtually all of them that would be domestically sourced, are stolen guns, which is property crime. And when it comes to handguns, they're very securely stored, as we know. The law makes us do that. And then a very, very small percentage, in fact, we found out what the percentage is because it's not available data in Canada, around 7/1,000ths of 1% of gun owners engage in straw purchasing. So we think there's somewhere around 50 instances of that over the last 24 years. So a very, very minuscule amount of that, some stolen guns, and then the overwhelming majority being from the United States.
Well, thank you for that. I have a question about handguns, just following up on the question from Mr. McGregor about regulating handguns. I don't have my RPAL, just my PAL, and I recognize that there are even stricter regulations about having a handgun. Would you agree with even stricter regulations rather than an outright ban? Do you think that's necessary?
I think there's a few holes that could be could be plugged in the system. And I'll give you an example. During the PAL application process, you have to provide 2 references of people that have known you 2 years or longer. And if you're married or common law, your spouse has to sign off on your ability to own and use firearms. 90% of those references are never called. We ATIP'd that. And in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of that application process is the human intelligence, right? You're asking someone if they're okay with their applicant friend having a firearms license. And that aspect of the system that already exists is not being used. So that's a really great example of we could call 100% of all applicant references for probably $2 or $4 million a year, but we won't do that. We won't even use that and see if that works. And remember, only a tiny, tiny fraction of these guns are ever domestically sourced in criminal behavior anyway. But even just that tiny fraction, we won't do it. We want to ban handguns instead because it's ideological, as we've seen.
Thank you, Mr. Van Popta. We go now to Mr. Moff, please. 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Dr. Kapoor, thank you so much for appearing, and especially on such short notice. You talked about mandatory reporting for firearms. We know it's difficult because it crosses several jurisdictions, including rules that doctors impose on themselves. So I'm wondering if you'd be supportive of a federal requirement for mandatory reporting, which is something that we could hopefully put into Bill C-21 that would require you. So if there were reasonable grounds that a patient may pose a danger to themselves or others, there would be a mandatory requirement that you report that belief to a peace officer, firearms officer, or chief firearms officer for use as evidence in an ex parte application. My question, though, is would that amendment hold up, given that health professionals are regulated by provincial colleges, and also open you up for civil and regulatory actions? I'm just curious what your take on that would be.
Well, I am not a lawyer, proudly not a lawyer. But I would say that I think the ideal situation would be to have a framework where the federal government and the various provinces work together on allowing this system to happen. We have similar examples with mandatory reporting of gunshot wounds, which is the law in 9 provinces, I believe, and 1 territory. That relieves physicians of their responsibility to protect confidentiality, and also, as I understand it, relieves us of the risk of civil liability, saying that as a non-lawyer. So I believe that it is possible to do it. In the case of gunshot wound reporting, it occurred organically. It started in Ontario, and it was such a good idea that it was widely accepted and spread across the country. I believe that the federal government could easily set up a template and could work with the provinces and territories to allow for appropriate legislation in the various provinces and territories that would remove the requirement for the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the regulator, to make that decision themselves as legislation overrules the rules of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. But I think it needs to occur together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Giltaca, 2 of your policies that you have are self-defense with a firearm and also concealed or open carry. They're on your website. Do you think that Canadians support those policies?
Well, I think some do. The reason why those are on our website is for gun owners to know where we stand on different issues, but we've never actively lobbied for either of those things. We're quite a ways away from there.
But they are
facing a gun
policies
ban.
of your organization.
Yeah, absolutely
though.
they are, yes.
And you know that you don't have a right to a firearm in Canada, correct?
So the Supreme Court has said something to that effect. Yeah, that's right.
I just get confused because your organization talks about firearm rights. And I have been subject, I see Ms. Wilson is here, to many of your attacks and attacks from your membership who have wished me to go kill myself was the most recent one. I didn't know KYS meant that. But he's...
I don't know what that means either.
I had to look it up.
Yeah. Well,
But,
I'm sorry
you know,
that's happened to you. It's, I've seen
But it
things happen to me, too.
Well, I'll
Yeah.
tell you, sir, that after you've appeared today and Ms. Wilson tweets about me, I am going to be bombarded, and I have been for years with your attacks. But I do want to thank you because you came to my riding in 2019 and in 2021 with your Canadian NRA talking points, and I want to thank you for getting me reelected. So I will leave it at that and move back to Dr. Kapoor. No, I won't, because I have 15 seconds left, Chair.
Did you wish to respond?
Yes, I do. We've never been in your riding spreading anything to do with firearm stuff. We did. We
2019 in a bus.
Oh,
Tracy
that one, yeah.
Wilson, yes,
You know what?
did.
You're right.
Yeah.
No,
I know
you're-
I am.
you're right.
And you were there twice in
That was-
2021.
It was a fun project, yeah.
Yeah, no, you've been to my riding 3 times.
Okay, thank you all. We will go now to Madame Michaud, s'il vous plaît. 2 minutes et demi.
Madam Michaud, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Giltaca, in an article in Le Droit in 2022, said that the provisions in C-21, before they were all well known, your coalition said they were ready to oppose arbitrary, ineffective dispositions or provisions, rather. And so we can understand that you are against banning guns in general. Perhaps you don't really believe in that. But it's quite curious that across the border in the U.S., we're seeing a debate that is really the contrary, that people are asking more for tightening gun laws. And in May of last year, guns were the main cause of death among young Americans, more than even traffic accidents. There's been a higher level of suicide with guns as well. So this bill would allow us to avoid tragedies that the Americans are suffering repeatedly. And I know we've had some tragedies at home here, but it's really something in the U.S. So what do you think of all that?
The situation when it comes to firearms, why you can own firearms, how they're obtained, everything is completely different in the United States than it is in Canada. The United States has virtually no firearm regulation to speak of in comparison to Canada. And in fact, if you look at the anti-gun groups in the United States, all of them are asking for what we have in Canada right now. That's what they have no licensing, they have no storage regulation, they have nothing there. So it's, and I encounter this all the time, people using studies from the United States, anecdotes from the United States. It does not apply. We've had gun control here for 30 years, since the early 90s. So it's, we have a very strict regime in Canada. Licensed gun owners abide by it or they have their guns taken away. And I think most people just want to continue to live their lives without this government intervention. That's why. Hopefully that helped. Thank you.
Unfortunately, there are always exceptions to the rule. And there were legal gun owners who have also committed atrocities in Canada, in Quebec. We're not sheltered from that. And I think regulating something like guns can be a good thing. I heard you talk about effective regulation. Can you give us, thank you, very quick, what would be an effective regulation for you here in Canada?
Well, there's a lot of different aspects of firearm regulation. And certainly, I think, you know, I have my own concerns with holes in the system. I talked about the licensing system, the application, where the firearms program doesn't call references. And I think, especially if you think in terms of domestic violence, if someone whose husband is trying to get a firearms license and they're never called, and that person gets a firearms license and can buy, own and use firearms, that's a concern for me. So we're more than happy to work with anyone to get rid of some of those loopholes and make sure that the system is as tight as it possibly can be while allowing people just to own their property and continue to live their lives. That's all we're really after. Thank
Merci.
you.
Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I keep on hearing the word ban being used in place of a freeze. I think it's important to use the correct terminology. I mean, like what Bill C-21 is doing, I mean, people who currently own handguns will be allowed to keep them and use them. They may not be able to buy a new one or sell the one that they own or transfer it to another person after C-21, but they will still be able to use the handguns they currently legally own. So it's very important to get that clearly on the record. Secondly, for the vast majority of people like who are out there using long guns, C-21 is not going to impact them. People with a possession and authorization license can still go out and buy a bolt-action rifle or a shotgun, and this bill is not going to impact them. And if there are restrictions on trying to control the number of handguns in Canada, and people still want to get into sport shooting disciplines, there still are options with rifles, right? You would agree with all of that. But there are options for people to engage in sport shooting with rifles, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So again, Mr. Galtag, I have to put it to you. It's handguns specifically that are on the spot right now. There are major concerns with them. We've heard it at this committee. And so again, I think the onus is on you. Like what further restrictions? Like right now, if you look at the exceptions that are put into the law, they do allow for people who are training, competing, or coaching in a handgun shooting discipline that is on the Olympic Committee or Paralympic Committee. What further restrictions do you think handgun owners or your organization would be able to accept if we're trying to meet this goal of putting a freeze on the number of handguns in circulation?
Well,
and to be able to continue doing their sport shooting?
So the reason why I call it a ban is because when I die, the RCMP are going to come and they're going to confiscate all my firearms, all my handguns, and of course my semi-auto rifles that were banned in May 2020. So a lot of long guns went, probably 500,000 long guns are sitting in safes. People just can't use them. No one can tell us exactly why all those people who haven't done anything to deserve it can't use them, but it was politically expedient, I guess, at the time. So this is a ban. They're trying to extinct people like me because obviously we're terrible. So as far as...
You have other rifles which are untouched by the OIC or...
Yeah, well, I'm running out of firearms because I lost all the semi-autos, now the handguns.
But come on, Mr. Giltag, I mean, there's lots of firearms you could still purchase with your pal.
And what happens when these ones and the handguns are gone? Then it's going to be the same conversation. Well, you still have 2 rifles left. You can certainly use those. It's just the onus isn't on me. And just to be fair, the onus isn't on me to prove why I should still own guns. The onus is on the government to prove that that's going to have a demonstrable positive effect on public safety. It keeps getting switched around. Like somehow I have to defend what I've been doing for 20 years and what Canadians have been doing for over 100 years. Now the onus is on us. Well, the government has all the data. They have everything. They should be able to show us that have we seen any data that this will have a demonstrable positive effect on public safety? I've watched every hearing. I haven't seen any. I've seen lots of rhetoric. We've had all kinds of interesting things happen tonight, but I haven't seen any real data. It's just like, well, you don't really need them anyway. And I have to disagree. There's 2 million people that own firearms and 650,000 licensed to own handguns, and we haven't done anything.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Sorry. That brings this round of questions, or this panel, to a close. I thank both witnesses for appearing and helping us with our inquiries. Your expertise, your experience is helpful. And with that, we will suspend and bring in the next panel. I call this meeting back to order. So with us by video conference for this second hour, we have from the Battered Women's Support Services, we have Angela Marie McDougall, Executive Director. From Regroupement des Maisons pour Femmes Victimes de Violences Conjugales, we have Louise Riendeau, Co-Responsable Political Issues. And from the Women's Shelters Canada, we have Lisa Martin, Executive Director. So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'll give you up to 5 minutes per group to make an opening statement. We will start with Ms. Riendeau to make an opening statement. Please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Bonsoir. Good evening. Thank you to the members of the committee for allowing us to share our insights and experience with thousands of women, victims of domestic violence, on the issue of gun control. The Regroupement has 46 shelters for women victims of domestic violence in all regions of Quebec. They house more than 2,000 women a year. For the Regroupement, Bill C-21 will improve the safety of Canadians, and our testimony will focus specifically on the safety of women and children who are victims of domestic violence. For us, the most significant points that we want to emphasize is that the license cannot be issued if there is a protection order. The fact that the license can be revoked if a person has committed an act of domestic violence is a positive point as well. Some of the measures, however, we are concerned about. The so-called red flag measure that allows a person to go to court to have a license revoked, since victims or other concerned individuals close to people who have problems can already go to the police or the chief firearms officer. We find this measure not only unnecessary, but even might be counterproductive for victims. We are concerned that the police will not take the steps to have a license revoked themselves and will instead ask victims to do this themselves, which we believe is much more cumbersome than going to the court or to the police. The Regroupement recommends that sections 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which introduce the red flag measure, be removed from the bill. However, we think that the existing system, where people can turn to the police or the chief firearms officer, is more appropriate and responsive to reality. Victims have neither the energy nor the moral strength to go to court and have a license and weapons withdrawn, in addition to all the steps that they have to take to protect themselves or flee domestic violence. Another worrisome measure is the fact that the person whose license has been revoked has a reasonable time to surrender his or her weapons to the police and may otherwise dispose of them. Although a search is possible, it is not automatic, and the time limit may be too long in the case of an abusive spouse or ex-spouse who could use the opportunity to kill his or her partner or children. So we think that these weapons should be surrendered immediately to the police. Improvements could be made to make the possibility of revoking a license if an act of domestic violence has been committed would be more effective, and to ensure that police officers will look at the overall situation and they won't just take into account physical violence. It would be advisable, we believe, to add a definition of spousal and family violence. This definition should also include all aspects of coercive control. The Divorce Act already contains such a definition. These kinds of violence are not always just physical or sexual violence, which are offenses, but it is made up of different manifestations aimed at controlling the spouse and her children. I am tabling with the committee the tools that our association has just produced for judicial actors. Understanding coercive control Manifestations of coercive control, which identify a number of tactics used by violent spouses to restrict the liberty and freedom and safety of their victims. I also would add the document Coercive Control, Predictor of Homicidal Risk. Research has shown links between coercive control and spousal homicide. In the UK, for example, a study of 358 domestic homicides found coercive control in 92% of cases. In Canada, spousal homicides occur in the context of separation. Homicide or attempted homicide was the first act of physical violence for almost 1/3 of victims. So I think that we really need to go further. We have to give police and gun controllers all of the elements they need to identify the presence of coercive control and not just consider incidents of physical violence. Providing a definition of domestic violence that includes coercive control would be a first step. Also, we could much better, we could improve police response, and we could offer them more training and help them to assess situations based on known and recognized risk factors. I'm a member of the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee in Quebec, and in the vast majority of deaths studied, the risk factors present were not detected by various stakeholders. And so we really have to provide the police and chief firearms officers a comprehensive list of the risks in this area that would allow them to treat this with the seriousness that it needs. We also, in order to be able to identify the risk factors, they must be trained to identify domestic violence, even when there's been no physical assault or criminal offense. The tools we have produced and have tabled with you could be used as such. Other desired improvements. We have seen the brief from the National Association of Women in the Law and the brief from Police se souvient, and we support them wholeheartedly. They have several recommendations that would provide better control and better safety for women. So as I said, we believe that Bill C-21 represents a step in the right direction, and we hope that improvements will be made to it to ensure a better protection for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. And we remain available to the committee for any additional questions. Thank you, Madam.
We go now to Ms. Martin to make a 5-minute statement, and please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to express my frustration at the late invitation 3 days prior to appear before the committee. We are a small organization with limited resources and a very full agenda. Taking the time to prepare and attend the session with such short notice presents significant challenges and does make us wonder if the link to gender-based violence against women is simply an afterthought for the committee. Women's Shelters Canada is a national nonprofit organization representing 15 provincial shelter associations and over 600 violence against women shelters and transition houses across the country. Bill C-21 is an important bill for those of us concerned with gender-based violence. Having said that, we do have some concerns and suggestions as to how the bill could be strengthened. Guns are used to terrorize, injure, and kill women and their children in urban as well as rural settings. We know that the risks are higher in rural communities where there are more guns and more opposition to gun control and fewer supports for women living with violence. According to the Canadian Femicide Observatory, there has been a 26% increase in killings of women and girls from 2019 to 2021. In 2021, 173 women and girls were violently killed. When known, 38% of these murders were with a firearm. As a result of these killings, 164 children were left without a mother. The 2021 report made it abundantly clear that, proportionate to their population size, small rural and remote communities bear a larger burden of femicides than urban ones. Firearms cause harm to women in ways other than by death and injury. In our annual Shelter Voices surveys, we ask shelters to report on a specific 24-hour period. One of the questions is, to your knowledge, how many women currently residing at the shelter have been threatened by a gun? Since the survey began, the average number of shelters that have responded is 230, and the average number of women staying at the shelter on that day that had been threatened by a gun is 100. The link between guns and violence against women is clear, as is the link between between guns and the instance of lethality for victims of domestic violence. It is my understanding that the bill will revoke an individual's license if they have engaged in an act of domestic violence or stalking or become subject to a protection order. In order to maximize the potential benefits of this, we feel that there are several concerns that need to be addressed. We feel it is necessary to define domestic and family violence within the bill. Our suggestion is to refer to the definition of family violence recently adopted in the Divorce Act. We have concerns in terms of the time it may take between when it is deemed that the firearm must be removed and when this actually happens. It has been documented numerous times that women are at the highest levels of danger of lethality when they make it known to their abuser that they are leaving the situation. The bill authorizes the issuance in certain circumstances of a conditional license for the purposes of sustenance or employment. We strongly feel that the employment exemption must be removed. One example here is the case of police officers. Although there is limited research in Canada, research done in the United States suggests that officers are actually more likely to abuse their domestic partners than the general public. In Nova Scotia alone, 14 police officers from across the province have been charged with crimes connected to domestic violence since 2012. In closing, I'd like to stress the importance of the need to improve the processes associated with screening gun owners and removing firearms from people who are at risk to themselves or others. The federal government uses its powers to make decisions about who can have firearm licenses. Despite the fact that several measures were introduced to help ensure this power, multiple inquests and inquiries have shown that this is not being done. We strongly recommend ensuring that there is strong language reinforcing this responsibility. The need for greater resources, commitments, and accountability measures will be key in the successful implementation of this bill. Women's Shelters Canada has been advocating for a national action plan on gender-based violence for over a decade. Key to our call for a national action plan is the need for consistency across and within jurisdictions in policies and legislation that address gender-based violence against women. It will be important that this be an integral part of the implementation of this bill. Finally, as a member of the Coalition for Gun Control and as a signatory to the brief submitted by the National Association of the Women in the Law, we would like to publicly state that we are in agreement with both of their detailed recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. We'll go now to Ms. McDougall. Ms. McDougall, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you very much to the committee for this opportunity to join you. I am here representing Battered Women Support Services in the unceded ancestral territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. Battered Women Support Services have, for the last 43 years, has worked to end gender-based violence through support services, through training, education, and through other community-based responses, including research and policy. It's a pleasure to join you this evening and to discuss gun violence in Canada. And we understand that it has a huge disproportionate impact on women and girls. And we recognize that what hurts and kills women and girls is gender inequity. That this effort to take action on gun violence has to be in concert with what Women's Shelters Canada has
Ms.
been leading
McDougall,
around.
Just for the interpreters, can I get you to speak just a bit slowly, more slowly?
Absolutely.
Right, thank you.
I apologize. While we recognize that what hurts and kills women and girls is actually gender inequity, and we support and are in 100% support of Women's Shelters Canada's work over the last 10 years to advance a national action plan on gender-based violence that takes into consideration the experiences of women and girls all across the land, both in rural and urban settings, and has taken great effort to highlight prevention, support services, legal responses, social infrastructure, and specific supports for Indigenous survivors across the country. Now, coroners have consistently identified that access to firearms as one of the top 10 risk factors when determining when a woman will die in domestic violence situations. And we understand that the presence of a firearm in the home must be determined, and if present, should be considered a high risk factor for homicide by a family member. In Canada, women own less than 2% of registered firearms. And this analysis helps us understand that women are twice as likely as men to experience being sexually assaulted, beaten, strangled, or threatened with a gun or a knife. While firearm-related violent crime continues to represent a small proportion of overall police-reported violent crime, the proportion of lethal violence that involve a firearm rose 26% of all homicides to 37% in 2020. We are, of course, concerned about the relationship to gun violence and the killing of women and girls. But we must also recognize that 42% of intimate femicides that were actually because of stabbing, knife violence, which speaks to the piece around the cultural shifts that would need to happen. Given that femicides are not currently and uniformly documented, we understand that firearms in femicide is also not documented accurately, and that would be an important piece of this action. And as my colleagues have said earlier, Battered Women's Support Services also endorses the National Association of Women in the Law in their submission on this matter. And I'd like to point out a few pieces that we agree with. And one is the removal of the employment exception. This is very important because we understand that a job that requires using a gun is never the only vocation open to an individual. Regardless of an individual's past or qualifications, there will always be jobs available to them that do not have that requirement. So we are concerned that this section would be interpreted and how permissive chief firearm officers may be in granting conditional licenses, not based on need, but based on an individual's job preference. We are, in echoing what Lise mentioned earlier, understand that research suggests that police officers are even more likely than the general population to commit physical violence against a partner. Needless to say, the obstacles to reporting domestic violence are heightened for victims of police officers. Police officers are rarely disciplined or prosecuted for acts of domestic violence. They should not benefit from a legal exemption to losing their license when they do so. And the other piece we think is important is the strengthening the provision around the license in cases of domestic violence. We most definitely are concerned about giving chief firearms officers broad discretions to determine whether domestic violence has occurred. We are concerned that we do not have a proper definition of domestic violence and family violence in the bill. This would be an essential piece. And as what has been stated earlier, we think that there's good language within the Divorce Act. But more than that, we must also recognize that domestic violence and stalking are not defined, and that stalking is also a lethality factor. We also would want to be certain that we are defining protection orders in the regulation. This, we would not want to see an opportunity where a
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, if you could.
Protection order could be given different names, take different forms. We're concerned that the lack of consultation to date on how to define them in the regulation, and we would want to ensure that the definition of protection orders is included in the Act. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start our rounds of questions at this point. We will start with Mr. Lloyd. 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, especially for the great work that you do in our communities. I know, especially coming from a rural community, we just got our first new women's shelter since 1984 in rural Alberta, and so it is a needed thing for our rural communities as well as in urban communities. So thank you for the often thankless work that you guys do, you ladies do in our communities. Something interesting, do any of you have any data, and something that, Ms. McDougall, you were saying is that there's not good enough data on firearms and femicides, but do you have possibly any data that breaks down whether or not the firearms being used in femicides or the perpetrators of the femicides using firearms are legal gun owners or illegal gun owners, or licensed gun owners or non-licensed gun owners? Or do you have any anecdotal information about that? I'll start with maybe Ms. Martin.
Actually, yes. I could get the exact citations, but I believe, according to the Canadian Observatory, most women who are killed with guns are legal gun owners.
Okay, that is surprising to me, but I would appreciate if you could send that data to us as well.
Sure.
Another thing, I think Mrs. Rondeau, forgive me if I pronounced your name incorrectly, Madame, but you had said that the risk factors are not identified because I think, well, you might agree, or maybe I'm wrong, that it's not a spouse committing a homicide that is the first risk factor that's seen. It's not something, maybe in some exemplary, like some cases it might happen, but there's usually risk factors leading up to that. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, well, we can see that in many situations where we've seen femicides and even the death of children, there were risk factors. And the most significant one is often the presence of domestic violence that in the past was not taken into consideration and that was not dealt seriously with by the police. And there's other risk factors like the presence of depression with the spouse, and which is not always taken into consideration. So there really has been, well, there are scientifically recognized risk factors, but they're not always known by the police services and by other actors. Therefore, we need to offer that training. And we also know that police services are interested in incidences that are offenses, but domestic violence has many manifestations that taken independently might look banal. And
Ms. McDougall, are you at all concerned? We've heard testimony, and I knew this before the meeting, before we had this study, that the Canadian Firearms Program currently doesn't contact every reference and when completing a firearms license. So you have to put your spouse or your common law partner or even past spouses, and they have to consent to you receiving a firearms license. Does it concern you that the Canadian Firearms Program has the tools to call these references to ask if they have concerns, but 90% of them are not being called, as one witness stated?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the real problems when we think about what this will look like on the ground. We know that it's very hard to follow through on this kind of follow-up, this important follow-up. And we see this in all areas within the system, regardless of what kind of aspect of domestic violence in terms of the criminal response. So it has to do with some difficulties within the way in which employees interpret their role, and also the overall a kind of a continued lack of concern about the lethality of domestic violence and family violence.
Thank you. Something that I've observed, it seems like we do have a lot of tools available, but the tragedies that we've seen have been primarily caused because we aren't using those tools the way that they're needed. We don't have the resources currently to identify when somebody has a mental illness, and we don't have, even in the case of the Canadian Firearms Program, not calling the references. We're not using the tools that we have available in order to really prevent these terrible tragedies and these terrible crimes from happening. And yet we're putting more legislation on when we're not using the tools that we have available. Although I agree, I think, and what you were saying all the witnesses about the protection orders. I think there's tweaks that we can make that will improve this. But until we actually are putting the resources, wouldn't you agree that until we're actually putting the resources into accountability, into ensuring that the tools that we have are being used, we're not going to see a drop in violence, domestic violence with firearms? I guess, would there be broad agreement? Broad agreement?
I do agree with that. It is certainly a concern that we have, and it's something that I know that advocates end up having to do, is to follow up and to see that the system does follow through on the policies as well as the practices. Canada has some of the best legislation to address domestic and sexualized and domestic violence, and unfortunately, we continue to see where the system fails repeatedly. And it's a bigger cultural shift that we need.
Thank you. Madame Rondeau, I think I've got limited time left, but I'd like to hear your perspective. I see your hand is up.
You've got no time left, but certainly the witnesses may answer. Go ahead.
I would just add that if we also want to make changes, we have to avoid being in areas of discretional power. We have to have strong language in the bill to give power to the chief firearms officer. Not just power.
Go now to Ms. DeMuff. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses today. And Ms. Martin, I will apologize on behalf of the committee for the short notice. I know that all of the witnesses are doing good work to save women's lives, and the time you take to prepare and appear before the committee is greatly appreciated by all of us. I want to ask about red flag, because we have had conflicting testimony on the provision in the bill. I've spoken with the women's shelter in my riding about the fact that this is an additional tool not meant to replace calling the police, but as a tool that a woman could use when, for example, if we talked about if she's married to a police officer, she's probably not comfortable calling the police. If she's an Indigenous woman who has complete mistrust of the police because she might get arrested for a probation order, which is a true story. So I guess we've heard testimony saying to get rid of it completely. Are you opposed to this being an additional tool? Because it has been tweaked from the original C-21, that it can now be done anonymously, and also someone else can go to court on behalf of the woman. So I'm just wondering, perhaps, Ms. Martin, we can start with you, and then I welcome the other ladies to chime in on it.
Sure. I think it's it is an additional tool. Definitely, but I think the other side of that coin is that we have to make sure that the onus doesn't fall on the women, and that by having that tool, that the other piece of this, that the part that we were just talking about, that is the responsibility of the firearms officers, that there's not a confusion in terms of responsibility. And so I think in the cases that you've cited, and these are real, happening every day in all provinces and territories. So I do think it could be a useful tool, and adding the anonymous component is important to that. I think my concern is the responsiveness within the judicial system, and so if we're going to do this, but it's like other measures that we've talked about within the bill. The implementation really is going to be key, and for implementation to happen, you need goodwill and you need resources, and more than goodwill, to be honest. You need accountability, so people need to understand that this is part of their jobs. So yeah, I'll leave it at that and leave my other colleagues to respond as well.
Yeah, and no one wants to put the onus on the victim at all. This is a very difficult situation that life-threatening situation that women find themselves in.
And you'd want to make sure that they can easily have access to that judicial system or for example, either a shelter or another service provider, that there is that easy access for that reporting mechanism, and that reporting mechanism will be swift as well.
Go ahead.
Nous, on a demandé de
We asked for the red flag provisions to be withdrawn because we think that it might harm more women than it would help. It's true that the situations that you gave as examples might be relevant for some, but in practical everyday life, we've often seen police officers that were not taking on the responsibilities. An example, in the criminal code, there is Section 110 that allows someone to have to keep the peace. And when someone says they're worried about their safety, they're supposed to bring that to a crown or a prosecutor. And we've seen on many occasions when police would say to the victims, ask your lawyer to make requests, and then in the meantime women have died. So we really think that we have to assume that police services are doing their duty, and that we really have to put every piece in place so that this measure does not become something that can exempt them from having to do so. If this is kept in the bill, we really believe that in the heat of the action that the police will say, you, madam, you go ahead, you take these steps. But if we keep that red flag provision, we have to have measures to prevent police and the firearm services to really assume their responsibility. Women have to do so much. Just having to go back to court so that children have care when the ex doesn't want to take care of them. These are difficult steps that women have to take. A woman who's fleeing violence.
Interrupt you and ask you a question.
Oui.
If a woman is married to a police officer and is being abused and the police officer has got a gun in the home, who should she call? I'm not trying to be cheeky.
Non, moi je pense que
No, I think that those are very complex situations indeed. So when you're talking about the wives of police officers that are sheltered, often the only thing they can do is to call the superior, because often there's collusion between colleagues. We've seen that in Quebec. There's union of police officers asking for this person not to lose their job. You're quite right that this is a difficult issue, but these people have they have supervisors, they have bosses, and we have to ensure that there's no exemption in terms of employment for that kind of arms possession.
Madame Michaud, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Michaud, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us here this evening. I appreciate that you're taking the time. I'm trying to start my timer, sorry. I just wanted to ask you about the red flag provisions, because we are hearing different things on this subject. I have understood some of the things that you've said and contributed, so rather than asking you why you are against it, I would perhaps focus more on the things that you had proposed, Ms. Riendeau, and you talked about a letter on the 7th of May that several women signed, that we take that red flag provision out, and you said that in place of it we should be able to give mechanisms and use mechanisms that already exist in the system, and to ensure that these are used as they were intended to be, in particular encouraging health care professionals in the community. When they talked about the red flag, Dr. Kapoor, in fact, who we discussed with earlier this evening, I asked him about Anastasia's law that we have in Quebec and that you are certainly aware of, that allows healthcare professionals to report when they have concerns. So do you think that that kind of legislation or law if it existed across the country, could be beneficial rather than going through a red flag provision as we're considering with this bill right now. Well, indeed, if we want to protect people in situations of domestic violence, we have to have a big safety net all around them. Their nearest and dearest, and of course professionals, they have responsibilities, but we cannot put them in a situation where they're in contradiction with their confidentiality that they have. So if we accentuate in the bill that there are professionals that have concerns, they should be clearly encouraged to speak to the chief firearms officer or the police to say that this person has a mental health problem or this person has violent behavior, and we think that it has to be reported. That would certainly be very helpful to women. I thank you very much. And indeed, I found it quite interesting what my colleague Ms. Damoff had mentioned about a wife of a police officer, for example, who was experiencing domestic violence. And indeed, in Section 31 of the bill, there is power given to the chief firearms officer to revoke the license of a person if he feels that that person has participated in domestic violence or has stalked someone. So there's something that we can add to that. The fact that the revocation of the license would prevent the person from keeping their job in the only job that they've lived in. So thinking about a police officer that would be exempt because he needs his weapon to do his job. There are groups that have asked us to remove that provision from the bill so that professionals who need weapons be exempted. So what do you think about that? Ms. Riendo first, and perhaps Ms. Martin and Ms. McDonald, I'd like to hear you as well. Well, look, we think that the safety of people is more important than someone keeping their job. There are rare people who can only do one job in their whole life. We obviously are for the removal of that provision from the bill. When you're a police officer or a security officer, you should be beyond any suspicion. Having a weapon is a privilege, and we can see indeed how police officers can terrorize their spouses, and that person might feel completely trapped because they have the impression that they won't be believed, that the system will not react. So we are in favor of removing that provision.
Madame Martin.
Ms. Martin, I know that you spoke briefly about that earlier, but if you could elaborate on that. I think you agree with Ms. Riendo. Yes, absolutely. I believe that there is no reason, there are no circumstances in which the employment should be the deciding factor. And recently even, there was a judge in Gatineau. It wasn't a case of firearms, but it was an issue, it was a situation of domestic violence where the person had even admitted his guilt, but what was referred to by the judge was the fact that because of his job, if he wouldn't have a police record, he wouldn't be able to keep his job, and that's just completely unacceptable. But this demonstrates also the lack of understanding concerning domestic violence and violence in the family and the impact in Canada that this has on society and on so many families. Thank you very much. Ms. McDougall, do you have something to add?
I think it's really important that we recognize that police have so much power and that there is a disproportionate number of domestic violence within families of law enforcement officers. And we, as an organization, are one of the few organizations in the country that that have a specific program for victims of police-involved domestic violence. And we see dozens of victims from all across the country. And the weapon is definitely used in terms of the coercive control, and it has been the weapon in the house and the way that the abusive partner uses the weapon to maintain power and control and to terrorize, both in the sense of while the relationship is in effect, but also when the survivor leaves. It is this is quite concerning to us if this remains in the bill if there isn't action taken on this, specifically for in recognition of the fact that it is a privilege. Gun ownership is a privilege, and it is not something that should be given, and it should be revoked 100%, and should when we're talking about law enforcement.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam.
Please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to also echo my colleagues around this table in thanking all three of you for appearing today and helping guide our committee through this study of this piece of legislation. And I think we've very well heard you on the concerns you've raised on the red flag provisions of this law. I mean, I think similar to what Mr. Lloyd was saying is that, you know, I think the existing avenues that we have open to people who are experiencing domestic violence, we need to focus efforts on improving those already existing lines, and that might be the preferable route for us as parliamentarians rather than adding a new system. I guess, Ms. Martin, maybe I can start with you because you know, we've heard of concerns that many people might have in contacting the police. But can you also tell us the experience that many women have with the court system? Because it too is a pretty formidable system to go through. It can be quite intimidating. We know it's quite overburdened in many areas. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because if we are to add a system whereby someone goes through the court system to get an emergency prohibition order, that could also be quite a daunting task.
Yes, I mean, I think it is a well-known fact that the court system is very burdensome, is a heavy system, and you know, we know that different provinces are taking different measures to address this. In Quebec, in the last year, they have, and maybe Louise can speak more directly to that, a specific court system to try to address this. You know, I guess within our preoccupation of the National Action Plan is also to ensure that that the systems in place are the same across the country, and that, you know, the levels of services and protection available to women and their children does not depend on their postal code. And that is the case today. I think we have seen many times how there have been bad decisions that have impacted very negatively on specific families, but also the impact it has on other victims of violence in terms of decisions taken by judges who were not properly informed about the impacts of domestic violence, the impact on children, for example. And so this whole piece of training of judges, you know, part of it is training federal judges, but it's just as important to train provincial judges. And I think in all of this, when we're talking about gender-based violence, to me, it's we can't keep on passing the buck or throwing the ball. It's the feds, it's the provinces in this. We're talking about people's lives here. This is an issue that, you know, impacts us as a society. And we really need to address it together and make sure that, as I said, that there is coordination, that there is a clear definitions and implementation and accountability.
Thank you. And I'll invite Ms. Riondo and Ms. McDougall to also comment on that last questioning. But I also wanted to ask, you know, I had heard mention that you wanted the definition of what a protection order is contained within the Act and not left to regulations. Can you just again repeat, like, specifically what you're looking for us to insert as a definition? I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. I'm not sure which three of you spoke about that in your opening remarks. I think it might have been you, Ms. McDougall, if I had it correctly.
I think it's the definition of domestic violence and family violence that we need to see in the Act, that and to draw on that definition that is already exists within the Divorce Act. and that would be an important piece.
And Ms. Riondo, do you have any other comments you'd like to add to this?
Oui, ben moi je dirais que
Yes, I would say that indeed we should ensure that the definition, that there is a definition of the protection order, and that covers all of the orders. There are provincial ones, there are ones in the criminal code, so we have to ensure that the definition is broad enough that will cover everything. But to come back to your question about the courts, even though research has shown that domestic violence continues after a separation, that it has impacts on children, we see a lot of judges who just seem to ignore those facts. So there's no guarantee that the fact that you go before a judge to ask for the guns to be taken away will be any more successful than going before to the police. They'll judge by the same criteria. So everyone has to be trained about domestic violence, about the risks that it poses, and the need to take this very seriously when there's the presence of weapons, and we have to ensure that we will prevent deaths of women and children that is connected to domestic violence.
That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So we're going to go into our second round. We're going to have to shoehorn it in to get it done. So we're going to cut down the Liberals and Conservative 4 minutes and the NDP and the Bloc to 2 minutes. So with that, I invite, welcome Ms. Kraut-Newman to our committee, and go ahead with 4 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. Reality is, domestic violence and gender-based violence in rural and urban settings, it can be next door to any of us. It can be anyone's neighbor. So I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for your time and advocacy. Physical violence, verbal violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, socioeconomic violence. I get it. And it's extremely difficult. So again, thank you. My first question I'd like to pose, I'll start with Ms. Martin. A significant number of women's organizations oppose the ex parte red flag measure, which invites victims to go to court themselves to have firearms removed from their abusers. If you could be so kind to explain why you oppose this measure, and what can we as legislators do to bridge the gap in this regard? So if you'd like to start and then allow the others to entertain the question as well, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I think Louise explained quite well in terms of the preoccupations or the reservations that existed in terms of the Red Flag Act. I think this is a technicality. I'm not sure that I said in my brief that I opposed it, although I do agree with the brief submitted by the National Association of Women in the Law, who have had more time to consider this. Having said that, I do think that we need to take into account measures in terms of for certain groups of people who are not comfortable for many reasons, justifiable reasons. And I think, certain groups we haven't mentioned are, new immigrant and refugee women to the country who may not feel comfortable going to the police, as well as racialized women. But I guess my concern is ambiguity, and we have to make sure that there is no ambiguity in terms of the bill. So I think this needs to be further considered. And I'll pass it on to Louise and Angela.
Hugo?
Je peux y aller. Moi, je pense.
Well, I could go. I think that the system we have currently that allows to either you go to the police or to the chief firearms officer is a good system. It can be improved, and perhaps that's what we should put our energy into, to indeed ensure that all of these applications be treated seriously, that there are simple alternatives. The chief firearms officer is not the police force next door, so that might be easier for some women. But we also have to give more information on how it works. It's not as easy, so easy just, or as easy as knowing who to phone. We need to train people more who are going to administer these measures. We have to have more public awareness for victims and other people to know where to turn to, and that already that will greatly facilitate the lives of people who can protect themselves by using those measures.
Ms. McDougall, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, please. I think that it's there's so many things that a victim or survivor has to do when they enter into the system. There's so many considerations that they have in the sense of their safety, their children's safety, employment, just managing the day-to-day. And so many victim survivors don't have the benefit of an advocate and are navigating the system alone. And this, though the red flag is, I think the intention is a good one, it does create the potential conditions where we're putting an unreasonable burden, again, on a victim and a survivor to address their safety. And when that happens, and we've discussed this a little bit so far, when that happens, when we create that kind of opening where the survivor is somehow then responsible for their safety, the system then orients itself in that way and begins to question whether a victim has done everything that she should have done based on the interpretation. And so there's a lot of work to be done already just in terms of the amount of victim blaming that exists. And the red flag, though I think the intentions are solid, creates another potential loophole and a chasm of which survivors could find themselves without an advocate, without understanding how to navigate the system, and then blamed if they are not following through in the ways in which the system thinks they should.
Thank you. I'm going to have
to
cut you off there. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ms. Cramp-Newman. We go now to Mr. Schiffke for 4 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll start by thanking Ms. Riendeau for her outstanding work with the regroupement pour les maisons de femmes victimes de violences conjugales. You're an exceptional group in my riding, and La Passerelle, which is doing exceptional work as well. And on behalf of them and on behalf of all the people in my community,
Ms. Martin,
I thank you.
Ms. McDougall, for your exceptional work. In a brief submitted by the Canadian Women's Foundation to the Standing Committee on Public Security in May 2018, they highlighted the fact that in Canadian households, the presence of a firearm in the home is the single greatest risk factor for lethality of domestic violence. And it's something that overwhelmingly impacts women because 80% of those killed by intimate partner violence are women. Ms. Martin, I appreciate your statistics that you gave in your opening remarks that showed that this has actually increased since 2019, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I also want to thank all three of you for sharing your amendments and the suggested changes in your opening remarks. What I'm hoping you can do, and I'm going to give you 45 seconds to a minute each to do this, is touch upon one or two aspects of this bill that are going to make a difference. We actually had a witness this morning who appeared and said this will do nothing to combat violence against women, violence related to guns in Canada at all. And based on your experience and your expertise, if you could choose one or two things in this bill that you know will make a difference, what is it and why? And I don't know who to start with, perhaps with you, Ms. McDougall. I see you nodding your head, and I apologize for putting you on the spot.
Not at all. This is the dilemma, isn't it? If we have so many opportunities to address gender-based violence, domestic violence, and we have yet to move in a fulsome way. And the National Action Plan that Women's Shelters Canada has advocated for 10 years is a roadmap for getting to the root causes and building services and building prevention and addressing legal issues. And overall, that is a really key, important intervention that we should move full-hearted into. And this piece around the legislation is important. However, it is a small sliver of the bigger picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. I'll turn it over to Ms. Martin.
Yeah, it is known that the sale of firearms has increased significantly in the last decade, so for that reason alone, I think we do need to address firearms. There needs to be more control, and for me, the section about revoking a license, that will make a difference, I do believe. But I guess I will slip in here the importance of sustaining the sector as well, because it is so important, as Angela was just stating earlier, in terms of the multiple steps that women need to go through when they finally are able to escape a situation. And so the sector plays a very important role in ensuring that safety. And I think this bill is part of a larger continuum. It's not one piece. It's
Thank you, Ms. Martin. And I'll give the last word, dernier mot, à Madame Riand.
Last word to Ms. Riendo. Well, if we want to assure the safety of victims of domestic violence, we have to ensure that every link of the safety net is tightened up. So we need consistency between the different measures. Indeed, if there's a protection order, we have to think about a revocation of license. If there was a threat of violence or actual violence, we have to think of taking back the license. We have to make sure there are no loopholes that indeed allow spouses to continue to terrorize or even go so far as to kill their victims and their children. Thank you very much.
We're going to finish off with Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was hearing you speak, I think it was Ms. Martin, about the delays in the revocation of the license, and it might be technical, but in Section 41, the bill amends the Section 89 of the Firearms Act, and the chief firearms officer is supposed to be notified immediately when there's a revocation. And some people told us that if you say without, or as soon as possible, that's pretty vague. So there should be a time limit that should be set in the law, for example, 24 hours. So does that appear reasonable to you? And what is your opinion on that? Perhaps Ms. Martin first and then Ms. Riendo. Yes, that seems very reasonable to me. And I think there have to be consequences as well if it's not followed. Ms. Riendo, you're nodding? Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that the information has to be circulated quickly, because when you're faced with violent spouses who want to attack their families, all the time that goes by can be a time bomb and indeed allow the person to act. And 24 hours seems quite appropriate to me. So when there's a revocation, the person should have to submit them or bring them in to police officers unless there are exceptional or circumstances. Thank you. And in conclusion, I would perhaps ask you to provide the committee with a list of amendments if you have any. I heard you say that you are in agreement with the amendments proposed by Police Se Souvient, for example, to better protect victims for domestic violence. And indeed, Polly gave us a very good list of amendments. So we're happy to work with them to try and improve this bill where we can. So I thank you very much for your time tonight and your testimony. The National Association of Women in the Law also did a great job on amendments.
Advise that they can submit any contribution they like of that nature to the clerk. It will be translated as appropriate and distributed to the committee. So that brings our meeting tonight to a close. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for sharing with us your time, your valuable time and experience, and helping us with our study. And thank you all. And we are now adjourned. Thank you.